So good day and welcome back from Purim Meshulish and Igeres HaKodesh. Very special. I think the next one will be in 20 years or so. Dr. Eben, this letter, Sacred Letters 29, talks about the virtue, the advantage of Halacha, of that section in Torah called Halacha. What is special about Halacha compared to Talmud and to other parts of Torah? This is what this letter is dedicated to. It's a long letter, and kind of a difficult one, but we'll get through it. Let's go. Igeres HaKodesh, page 296. Igeres HaKodesh 29, Chavtes. Eishes Chayil Ateres Bailo. It says in Mishlei, Shlomo Melech says, a woman of valor who is considered Eishes Chayil, Ateres Baila. The woman who is a crown for her husband. Now, this is explained to be that the woman is the Torah Shebiksav, is analogous to the oral Torah, and the male is analogous to the written Torah, to Torah Shebiksav. And we'll see how this is developed in this chapter. Isa Gemara, we find in the Gemara Pered Daled de Megillah, the fourth chapter of Megillah, Udishtamish Betaga Chalof. Someone who uses the crown of Torah for their own sake, their own gain, Chalof, passes on. It's inappropriate to do that. Zehu, Zeh HaMishtamish, this refers to someone B'mi sheshayne halacha is kisra shel Torah. Someone who learns Torah, which is called the crown of Torah. So we see that halachas, according to the Gemara, halacha refers to the crown of Torah. There's the Torah itself, and there's its crown. Tanat V'Eliyahu, we learned the Tanat V'Eliyahu says, halachas. Whoever learns halachas every day, muftach le'shehu b'baylam haba, he'll merit to the world to come. So these are quotes from Mishlei and the Gemara. Tzarech Lahavin asks the Alter Rebbe, Lom nikru halachas b'shem taga. Why are halachas called a crown? And why are they called kisra shel Torah, the crown of Torah? That's number one, this first question. Number two, v'gam lama shoyna halachas dafke muftach loy. Why specifically someone who learns halacha is promised to have olam haba? But if you learn Stam Gemara or you learn Kabbalah, you learn Hasidus, there's no such a statement. It's only about halacha. Why?
Or Gemara.
No, it doesn't say that. It says halachas.
No. I'm saying. You asked the question. It's exactly why.
Yeah.
Why halacha?
Right. Yeah. V'lo yishar divrei Torah, and why doesn't it apply to all the rest of Torah? That if you learn any part of Torah, you merit to the world to come. And so we need to understand what it says in the 11th chapter of Menachos. Afilu. Even if a person just learned one chapter in the morning, he fulfills his obligation of Torah learning. So the implication is dafka, specifically halacha. Asks the Alter Rebbe, why don't you fulfill your obligation of learning Torah by learning any part of Torah? Why must it be specifically halacha? This is the question. So what the Alter Rebbe is going to explain, as I said in the very beginning, is the virtue of halacha, that aspect of Torah. Let's continue. It's known, what the Arizal taught. And this is a very, very important teaching for all of, not just Tanya, for all of life and all of Torah. Shekol Adam Yisrael, every single Yid, Tzarech Lovim Bilgugulim Rabim, must come back in many incarnations until he fulfills all 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. And in what manner? B'machshava, in thought, dibur, in speech, u'mais, in action. And the purpose and the reason why he must come back is lahashlim levushi nafshay. It's to complete the garments of the person's soul, ulutaknam, and to correct them. Shelo yehei levusha dechasra chulu. As it shouldn't be a missing, a lacking garment. In other words, a garment needs to be a nice, laundered, well kept and smelled with a pleasant odor. In other words, there's machshava dibur maisa. Every mitzvah has a thought associated with it, a speech associated with it, and a dibur, although each mitzvah has its primary mode, but there are the other aspects within the mitzvah. So as long as you haven't made your mitzvah, i.e. the garment, complete in thought, speech, and action, you will have to come back again to do that. This is a teaching of the Holy Arizal. Levad, the Arizal says, there's an exception. This doesn't apply. Mitzvahs hatluyas b'melech. Mitzvahs that are solely dependent on the king of the Jewish people. Shehu, he, the king, Moitzi Kol Yisrael, he exempts all Jews, all Yidden. So those mitzvahs we don't have a personal obligation to do. We fulfill them through the king. Kihi, and what's the logic? Kihi klal is kulam kulu, because the king is the general representative of all Yidden. So therefore, certain mitzvahs only apply to a king, and if we are connected to the king, right, we fulfill those mitzvahs through the king. That's what the Arizal says. The reason is why this is necessary, but everything else, all other mitzvahs that don't depend on a king, every one of us has to do in a complete way. And the reason is, and if not, we have to come back, be reincarnated. We need to envelop and enclose all the 613 levels and faculties of the soul, that there shouldn't be one that's missing. Nadora means missing. Lo nadera, it shouldn't be missing. It shouldn't be lacking. This, Yoini, ends the quote kind of from the Arizal. Now the Alter Rebbe explains. So we know from the Arizal, we must have these garments, otherwise we're reincarnated over and over. Says the Alter Rebbe, to explain further and elucidate the absolute necessity and the need to have these garments, it is explained in the Holy Zohar. And it's understood to every person who uses who's bright and intelligent, who has intelligence, which is every person. Since the level of spirit and soul within man are a created phenomenon, it is impossible for any creature and creation to comprehend the infinity of God. And even after Hashem illuminates of himself, and he kind of shines in a progressive way. Top of page Kuf Mem Tes. Madregas rabbis, madrega acha madrega. The progression goes from level to level, and therefore making it possible to sense and have some benefit from the emanation of God's infinity. As we learned earlier in Tanya. that the manner in which Hashem gives us ability to relate and benefit from the infinity of God's light. It's through many contractions, mighty contractions, v'levushim rabim, vatsumim, many garments and mighty ones, hayiduyim liyoidechein, that are known to those that study the esoteric teachings of Torah, i.e. the Kabbalah, v'nikroyim be'idrei rabba, and in the Idre Rabba, which is a section of Zohar, these tzimtzumim are called b'shem Cyrus, with the name hair. Look, Chevra, hair. Lots of hair. Hair, Cyrus. Udechsiv b'Daniel, it says in Daniel, v'sar reishei, the hair of his head, kamar naka, is like white wool. So white wool is a reference to a very high level of God. White is purity, and the hair is associated with that. In other words, the hair is a tzimtzum on a high level of godliness, on white. So although it's true that Hashem makes tzimtzumim, contractions, availing to us the Ein Sof, in a limited, contracted way, nevertheless, the soul, spirit, and soul, the three different levels of the neshama. Lemizba, they cannot tolerate, they can't handle ha'oir, the light of God, the infinite kitoiv that is good, u'mosik is sweet, ha'oir chulu. It's too overwhelming. U'kameshakosov, as it says, Lachzois b'noyam Hashem, to see the sweetness of Hashem. Says the Alter Rebbe, the word in the verse, Loshon ni'imos v'arivos. Noyam means sweetness. Umasikos, like matuk and sweet. Three different words, ni'imos, arivos, umasikos, all meaning sweetness. V'tainuk, and it's a tremendous pleasure, otzum, a mighty pleasure, laying cats Adam for nightim, as it says, Oz tisaneg al Hashem. Then you will have pleasure of Hashem when Mashiach comes, v'hisbia b'tzachtochos, and he will satiate the pleasurable thirst. That's how pleasurable it will be. Loshen tzacha, tzoma. The word tzacha, tzachtochos, means tzoma, thirst. K'mashikosav b'zoyar, as it says in Zoyar. V'ein b'koicha lekabla nimes v'dir v'tzatzachtochos, and it's impossible for the neshama, for the soul, as the soul is invested in the body, to receive the sweetness, which through us having that thirst, that it shouldn't go out of his cover of the light. With this battle, and if it does, it'll be annulled in its existence. But kinei bavuka, like a little candle is annulled to a great flame, to a torch. Unless from this level of light itself, tishtalshel v'timshich v'menu, will come forth through progression, through ishtalshelus. Eze ha'ore mu'etes, what we will have will be a very minute emanation, b'derech ishtalshelus, in a manner of progression, madrega ha madrega, level upon level, b'tzimtzumim rabim, with mighty contractions, ache yivre mimenu, until it will create levush echod, one garment, nivra, which will be a created one, me'ein mehus oirzeh, that will be analogous to the condensed light. Lahalbish hanefesh, and there it will be possible to enclose. The soul will be able, the nefesh, ruach, and neshama, the three levels of the soul, will be able to enclose itself there, v'derech levush zeh, and through this garment, shum ein oir zeh, which is similar to this infinite light, Tuchel leones, the soul can have delight and pleasure, miziv oir zeh, from a ray of this light, ulasigoi, and to comprehend it, the latest battle mitziusa, and it will not be annulled of its existence. Take, for example, someone who looks at a sun through a fine and lucid speculum, right? He looks at the sun, so he can see, but he can't see. And it says in the Torah, Moshe came to within the cloud, and he ascended. He enclosed himself in the cloud, and he ascended, and he saw a kind of God, metaphorically speaking, through the cloud. RC Dalfin, as this concept is explained in the second section of Zohar, Daf Reish Yud, page 210, V'reish Chavtes and 229. This light that we're talking about of Hashem, Hagonus l'tzadikim, that's hidden for the tzadikim, l'osed lovei, to experience when Mashiach comes, Hanikre, which we call B'Shem Noyam Hashem, the sweetness of God, the tzachzochis, and the thirst of having for God. Lisanig al Hashem, to pleasure oneself with God. V'dalid meis almen diksufim, and the 400 worlds of pleasure, of delight. The Mesange Bohin Tzadikaya, it says in the Zohar, that tzadikim have this great delight and pleasure from this level of godliness. Hulu Kamashikosov Arba Meya Shekel Kesef. This is by Chevron, with the Avram bought the field for 400 shekel kesef, 400 shekel. In Yesh by Milas, so it says, one second, Avram, it says in Zohar that the 400 shekel represents the 400 levels of godly sweetness. In Yesh by Milas Madregas Rabbis Meoid. There are many levels, higher and higher, one upon the other. But a minute emanation that descends level after level, to create to create a certain garment which we can relate to. This comes from the lowest level, within this light. We call this the lower level. V'achorayim in the backside. Derech moshul, like the moshul that we had earlier in Tanya, that the person who gives something to someone who he loves and he cares for, he looks at them and gives them with a smile and enjoys that. But then there is the concept of somebody you don't like, you throw it from the back. So the Alter Rebbe is employing that here. The last. What are we getting from this last level, which is like the rock bottom, the sediment in a barrel of wine that it's all the way in the bottom, and it's just the bad pieces and all of that. What? What'd you say?
It's called in Hebrew. It's called psolet.
Psolet, yeah, psolet, yeah. He gives you the references. Next page. 298. And what we benefited from is just from what's left over. Just as in a person's soul, there's a power of pleasure. A person has pleasure from what he has pleasure in. Some people have pleasure from Seichel Chodesh, from coming up with new innovative ideas. And similar to the pleasures that people have. So pleasure is the inner aspect. In other words, pleasure doesn't need the outside. The pleasure comes from the inside. What is the chitzonius, the pleasure? The outside, he says, that's what we call willpower. Look further. Uprinas hataynik sheba uprinas koyach harotzen. This refers to the power of will. Sheba shu reitze mashu reitze. A person wants what he wants. So that's the external, because reitze means the item triggers you, and because the item triggers you, you want it. So the ratzon, and compared to tainug, is chitzonios, external compared to pnimius, to the tainug. The Hainu, when he says, what does a person want, Avram? Something that is not painful. A normal person doesn't want something that's painful. Right? So what do we see? That Ratzon goes away from, right? Goes away from something that is contrary to pleasure. But it's not pleasure. It's the external of pleasure. That's what he's saying. So too in the moral, with the infinite light of Hashem, metaphorically speaking, the will of the divine God, it is external on the backside, to the supernal pleasure, Hashem, and Hashem's sweetness, and Hashem's thirst, the sufim, and those desirable, pleasurable worlds, now that we mentioned earlier. Although they also enjoy and benefit from the ultimate unity, because Hashem and His will are one, and which is different than the will of man, God forbid. There's no similarity whatsoever between the will of man and the will of God. There's no comparison. Nevertheless, the Torah uses, it employs human terms, to shatter the ear, in other words, to catch your attention, using words that you're able to hear it when it's used as an analogy and a riddle. So it's analogy and original for God and Hashem's creation and the manner of creation. So therefore, when we say about Hashem's pleasure and Hashem's will, it's all metaphors. And we use these misholim and these militzos, these and parables and these riddles from man's soul, haklula mikoyach hataino, because man is comprised of the power, the faculty of pleasure, v'harotzain, and will, v'chochma, ubina, and wisdom and understanding, chulu. Uknira b'chush, and the Alter Rebbe says, as we see in actuality, when a person intellectualizes with a very deep new idea, so it's at that time, at least at that moment, there develops, that gives birth to a tremendous, joyous, wondrous appreciation of the idea. Avram, in other words, you coming across a new idea. So when you studied this idea, you mastered the idea, the result is much greater, that you create a pleasure that you have in the idea, which is much greater than just the intellectualization of the idea. But it begins through the intellectualization process. Hashem encloses this idea that really it comes from the pleasure into intellect. He says, so when a person feels the idea and the wisdom. The Hainu Shemasigo Mavina, he comprehends it, he understands it, hates it very well. Azai Marbish Gapkin, then he has some sensation, some feeling of the delight and pleasure within the idea. And therefore we call it Bina. We call Bina b'shem Olam Haba. Bina is called in Kabbalah the world to come. B'Zohar HaKodesh in Zohar. Shibchinas is Galus HaChochma Me'ataynu K'Maluvish Bo. Because Bina is the revelation of the idea with the pleasure associated and permeating the idea. Shemasikim Tzadikim Gan Eden, which the Tzadikim experience in Gan Eden, Umaskilim B'Pnimiyus HaTorah, and they understand the depth, the inner part of Torah, the Kabbalah, the secrets of Torah, the Horaisa Mechochma Nafka, because Torah comes from Hashem's wisdom, Horaisa V'Kutshubrichu, and Hashem and His Torah, Kul Echad, are all one. Chevra, we're stopping here, and we will continue.
Rebbe, can I ask just a short question?
Sure.
A quick question.
Sure.
The word that the Rebbe here is mentioning, tzachtochos, right?
Yeah.
The word, so in modern Hebrew, it means to shine up. I'm trying to understand where is he getting the root of this for your taich.
Right.
It's not
my taich, it's the Alter Rebbe's taich. Let me look at it again, and I'll give you an answer tomorrow, Bli Neder, okay?
Sure, thank you.
Zay gesund. Have a good day, everybody.